Hey everyone, welcome back to the Casual Watch Review channel. Well, 2020 has certainly been a year of ups and downs to say the least. But in terms of my watch reviews, I've reviewed more micro brands than any other watches. Today is going to be no exception. We're going to take a look at the US micro brand Goodspeed. So big thanks to Jeremy at Goodspeed for sending in this vintage racing inspired chronograph, the GoodSpeed Sonoma. So let's give a little bit of history about Goodspeed. So GoodSpeed Watches began with the idea of creating affordable chronographs inspired from the golden age of motorsport when driving was still an analog process. This is their current project, the Sonoma, and it's named after the famous racecourse here in California. Now, I've not personally been to this racecourse myself, but I did get the opportunity to see a few NASCAR races at the closest track to me, which is in Fontana. Being originally from the UK, this was an amazing spectacle to see. I got the opportunity to see a few NASCAR races, and I also got to see Danica Patrick in one of her last races. She is famous for being one of the very few female professional NASCAR drivers. The Sonoma racecourse is not only known for its NASCAR races, but they also have motorcycle racing and they have a drag strip as well. So it's a very fitting namesake for a racing watch. The Sonoma watch is a very interesting design that certainly has some notable racing inspired themes. But to me, there's also a few confusing ones. So let's take a closer look at Goodspeed's first production watch. The version we are looking at here is the mechanical version, and all credit to Goodspeed, they also have a quartz offering. I honestly think most Kickstarter watches should do this, offer both versions. Kickstarter for the most part is based on aesthetic, and usually no one has seen the real watch, it doesn't exist, or there's only a prototype version. A quartz watch, I think, allows collectors to dip their toes in on a design. If they're unsure about the quality, you could go with the mechanical and the hopes that the fit and finish is good, as the Kickstarter makes out. Thankfully for Goodspeed, they have nailed the fit and finish here. For the quartz, they offer a citizen movement, much to my appreciation, as I can't honestly stand seeing another bicompact dial layout chronograph using the Seiko VK64 Mecha Quartz movement. A watch for me needs to look alive, and Mecha Quartz being completely still just doesn't appeal to me. Here, thankfully, Goodspeed have used the Miyota 6S21 Quartz for theirs, so forgo the feature trade-off of Mecha Quartz to go with a standard quartz movement. So good job there. So the version we're looking at here is the mechanical one and features the Seagull ST1901. This is a 19 jewel movement that can trace its origins all the way back to the machinery bought by the Chinese manufacturer from the now defunct Swiss brand Venus and their very famous caliber 175. Even though it's hidden behind the caseback, the ST1901 is a relatively pretty movement. We have a running seconds to the left of the dial and a 30-minute counter to the right. The central seconds here is the chronograph seconds. The movement itself is a good choice for this watch, and it allows for a very low profile due to it being a manual wind. In fact, this watch has a case thickness of only 13.7mm. Also, the movement is relatively inexpensive compared to the famous Valjoux 7750 or Seiko's newish caliber 8R48. The only trade-off here with this movement is it has no hacking for the seconds. This is a feature of the movement that you will see in all of the Seagull branded military watches that use this movement, like the 1963 reissue. Also, the movement, of course, is dateless. As for the continuous non-hacking seconds, for me the ideal, of course, would be to have hacking, there's no question. However, for vintage racing watches, where its other main feature other than telling the time is to act as a stopwatch, we rightly see this chronograph emphasised more here. Not to mention, of course, the other very famous racing watch that does not hack, the Omega Speedmaster. Let's take a closer look at the case, and the case speaks of vintage racing watches like the Hoya Ortavia I reviewed a few weeks ago. This style case is called the tonneau case, or barrel to use its English translation. Unlike the vintage watches that inspire this one that had base metal cases, this is 316L stainless steel. The front of the case is finished in what's called a sun ray brushing, so named because the brushing pattern radiates out from the centre. The sides of the case are polished, which adds a nice contrast to the brushed stainless steel front. The buttons are nicely recessed, the crown is nicely signed and also very well proportioned, but it's not screw down, which is in keeping with a lot of other chronographs. Even though it doesn't feature a screw down crown, it still has 100 meter water resistance, so it should cover you for most situations. The case back, however, is fairly uneventful. It just has the usual markings and the name in the centre. In a world where a lot of micro brands use case backs to really show off, this one is very plain. In keeping with vintage watches, sure, but it may as well be transparent to give you a sneak peek of the relatively pretty Seagull movement. The only thing about the case that leaves me a little confused, and in particular is highlighted on this Pepsi version, is the bezel. So the bezel has a grip that looks like it can be turned. Now it does feature a tachymeter, so I'm not sure how useful it would be to turn the bezel, but it won't stop you from trying when you first get your hands on this watch. This is something that I always found frustrating with some Casio watches. They looked like they had movable bezels, but they didn't. This style bezel is a clear nod back to the Hoya Ortavia. However, I believe that one moved. Now I can be corrected on that. The confusing part, however, is the colour scheme. And Chris and I actually discussed this on the Casual Watch Talk podcast a few weeks ago, before I even got the opportunity to review this watch. The confusion is more to do with the Pepsi colour scheme used. This no doubt looks cool. You almost never see a bicolour tachymeter, but there is a reason for that. The Pepsi bezel was originally invented for the pilots of the Pan Am Airways. And for our younger viewers, Pan Am Airlines was back in the day when not all airlines were owned by 4 companies in the US. The Pepsi dial was invented by Rolex for Pan Am, and it was designed for their GMT watches, so the pilots knew roughly the day and night for their destination airport. Blue, of course, being night and the red indicating the day. For a tachymeter, other than looking cool, the Pepsi colour scheme has no real purpose. A tachymeter is a continuous measurement of distance over time. It's not an either or a day versus night type measurement. Still, it does look cool. They have a version also in solid colours as well. Let's take a closer look at that dial, the most striking part of the design for me. And the 3 things that really stand out about this dial for me are the hands, the very flat look of the dial, and the Fotina loom. So let's talk through those. The hands, like the bezel, look cool, but also have somewhat of an identity crisis. They clearly look like dive watch hands to me, not the narrow hands typical of a chronograph. It gives the watch a distinctive look, and the larger hands certainly make up for the usual lack of loom that comes with being a chronograph owner. Also, the indices are very dive watch-esque. The dial is largely uncluttered with 2 sub-registers, which makes telling the time and seeing the continuous seconds very easy. The sub-dial register hands are simple in design and are unloomed. No other real depth or dimension to the dial in terms of applied indices or logo, other than the slight recessing of the chronograph dials with a radial effect. The lollipop second hand, again straight from a vintage dive watch. In fact, the dial is not that dissimilar to a vintage and now reissued Nevada Grenken Chronomaster Aviator. The dial and hand combination is bold on this watch, and I commend them for that. The peach loom, all I will say is I'm not a fan of this trend in general, so it would be unfair to single this watch out because of it. I think this has largely been overdone, especially by some of the larger brands, in particular Omega. Let's take a look at the dimensions of this watch. We have a case dimension of 42mm, As mentioned before, a case thickness of 13.7mm, a very wearable lug size of 46.5mm. The mechanical version features a sapphire crystal where we have mineral on the quartz version. The bandwidth is 20mm, which is my favourite bandwidth, a whole host of straps. They also include it in different colours as well, so there's a stainless steel, black coating, and they've also had a limited edition gold version, and they do also have a beads of rice bracelet available as well. Let's get it on the wrist and do a quick wrist shot. Here we can see it on my 7.2 inch wrist, very light and comfortable. The case is very well proportioned. The leather strap is comfortable and also has that vintage rally strap inspired look to it. So in summary, a great little vintage inspired chronograph. As this is Goodspeed's first watch, I'm honestly excited to see how the brand grows. If I had the opportunity to review another one, I would jump at the chance. To me, this looks very much like how Stratton looked in their early days. As always with these reviews, it's more important what you guys think, so let me know in the comments section down below. I'm really interested to hear your feedback. If you're new to the channel, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button and then give me a thumbs up, and then let me know in the comments section down below that you're a new subscriber so I can say hi. If you're interested in more longer form content, please head over to our podcast available on all your favourite podcasting apps, iTunes, etc. We've had some great guests recently. As always, I do really appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time on the Casual Watch Review channel.